So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. So, it's my joy to introduce our first speaker, Kathleen. Kathleen Domingo. She serves as the Executive Director of the California Catholic Conference, and she lobbies on behalf of the 12 dioceses, representing bishops on a range of issues, such as human life, strong family, racial and environmental justice, health, restorative justice, and religious liberty. Kathleen is really a trailblazer. This legislative session, the California Catholic Conference successfully fought to amend a bill that would have significantly expanded physician-assisted suicide, which is the first time suicide expansion in any state has been thwarted. So, wow. She also served 8 years at the Archdiocese of LA, leading One Life LA, created Respect Life Week, and she's a national speaker, writer, organizer, degrees from USF, and also the Master's in Theology from the Pontifical John Paul II Institute for the Studies of Marriage and Family. She and her husband Rocky have 2 children, and they're a member of the Holy Spirit Parish in Sacramento. So without further ado, welcome Kathleen.
Thank you. Oops, it's connected. Good morning, everyone. I will try to remember to use the mic. Can you all hear me? Okay, all right. So good morning. As you heard, I spend my days doing religion and politics. I will not be talking about politics today, though, so don't worry. Another day, or if you have questions later, I can answer questions. But I'm actually here today because I've been asked to tell you what you already know. You already know that you are a gift. You're a gift to the world, you're a gift to your families, you're a gift to people who love you. I'm here to just affirm that for you. And I want to give a disclaimer at the beginning. You might get to the end of my talk and say, she didn't actually say anything I didn't already know. And if that's true, that's perfectly fine. Because a lot of you know a lot of these things, and part of what we're doing here today is a reminder or an opportunity to bring things that have maybe sunk way down deep inside of us and we've kind of lost sight, bring them back to the forefront and give ourselves time to think about them and meditate on them. So don't feel like you've been gypped. If you get to the end and say, I could have given that talk, you probably could have. Next year, you'll be up here. So as you heard, I spent 8 years working for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles for Archbishop Gomez. And 8 years ago, when I started there, he came to me and said that he would like to have a large pro-life event in Los Angeles. He had been invited up here to the Walk for Life West Coast, and he said, I think we can be pro-life in LA, can't we? And I said, well, of course, Archbishop, we can be pro-life in LA. He said, all right, go figure that out. I said, okay, sure. So I talked to Archbishop, and I realized that he was really looking for something different. His goal in LA, being sort of the cultural capital of the United States, right, in many ways, he said, let's do something to change the culture. There are a lot of organizations whose goal it is to reduce the number of abortions in the United States or in California or in a particular city, and that's a good and worthy goal, and it absolutely is a goal that we share. But he said, let's try to figure out what LA can do specifically. And so a group of us took about 6 months and we sat down and we tried to figure out what could we do that was unique in LA? What could we add to the world that didn't already exist? And in the course of that time where we were discerning and discussing, I had a revelation. Now again, you may already have had this revelation. I didn't have it until 8 years ago, so bear with me. I was talking with a woman who has actually, I think, been a mentor or a speaker at Given Institutes in the past, Christina Barba. Anyone know Christina? She is with Culture Project, and just a lovely woman, and she has a bunch of young adult missionaries who go around all over the country speaking about chastity and pro-life issues, and just beautiful young missionaries. And I was talking to her, and she said this thing that was so profound. She said, so often, women can't recognize the dignity of their unborn child because they don't first understand their own dignity. And I was floored. It's like, wait, say that again. I need to write that down. It wasn't that I didn't know it, right? Of course, you're like, well, of course, yeah. But I hadn't thought about it in that way. And I realized I hadn't thought about it in that way because I had never been in a position where I questioned my own dignity. I just hadn't. I was I'm grateful to have grown up in a family where that wasn't something that I ever had to question or worry about. But as I started thinking about that, I realized, oh my gosh, look around at every single situation in the world, in our country, on our streets in LA, on the streets here in San Francisco, children in foster homes or in foster care, people living on the streets, women who are facing abuse, women who are looking for abortion. What do they have in common? They have lost a sense of who they are and what they're made for. They've lost a sense of their dignity, or as we'll be talking about today, their giftedness. And so we ended up building a whole event around that theme. And we decided that's what the world needs to hear right now. The world needs to hear people talk about finding their dignity, being reintroduced to their human dignity. And so that's what we set out to do. So I'm just going to share one story of so many that we have from One Life LA. There was this woman who we invited as a keynote speaker. Her name is Lizzie Velasquez. Has anyone ever heard of Lizzie Velasquez? She's an internet sensation. You should look her up. She's fantastic. Lizzie was once named the ugliest woman in the world. She was given that designation on social media. It was blasted all over the place. She came across it and she was devastated. So Lizzie has a disease, which when you hear about it, you think, well, that might not be so bad. Her body doesn't produce fat. And so you're like, I might want a little bit of that. Poor thing though, she's got other things that are going on with her, right? But she's just lovely. Her parents raised her to never realize that she was different from anyone else. She didn't realize until she went to kindergarten and people started pointing at her that she looked any different than anyone else. And she was raised with this beautiful upbringing of people who blessed her and treated her so wonderfully all the time. And when she ran across this social media post that had just gotten millions and millions of views, were saying that she was the ugliest woman in the world, and the comments, she should take her own life. She shouldn't even exist. Why is she still here? Who wants to see her? She would do the world a favor by just leaving. She really had a rough time. But she tells the story that she was able to turn that terrible moment into a positive because she said, well, wait a minute. I don't feel that way at all. I actually love my life. I have a fantastic life. I have great friends. I have a family that totally supports me. She has a career. She has all these things. She's like, people just don't know me. That's why they think that. And so she set about to change the narrative of her own life and to show people, hey, I've got human dignity and I've got beauty because God made me this way. And he made me this way specifically so that I can tell you about my dignity and my beauty and my giftedness, and you will come to understand your own through hearing my story. So I would encourage you, look up Lizzie Velasquez. She's really amazing. And she was one of our keynote speakers at One Life. So sometimes, people have to kind of understand what we're trying to do, right? We tell that story, and the people in the audience are like, oh my gosh. So we've had so many just wonderful people that I've had the opportunity to get to know over the years. And so Lizzie's story, as you can imagine, is not necessarily meant to convert anyone, right? We weren't setting out to say, well, you're in this camp and now we're going to move you to this camp. It was meant to help anyone, all the listeners, understand what does that mean about me and then what does that mean about everyone else. And so it's a good reminder today as we're talking about this theme of receive the gift that you are. Sorry, I just want to check my time real fast. Okay. That to remember something very important in our theology, and that is that God created us. He loved us into being, right? These are all words that we've heard before, things that we know. So picture God, right, in all his goodness and all his wonderfulness and all his fullness. He doesn't need anything. He doesn't need anything, right? He could have just been God. That could have just been it. Why did God create the world? Google that and you'll be studying theology for the rest of your life. Why did God create the world? No one really knows, right? He didn't need it, but he wanted us. And he wanted each of us. And so theologically, we know God created us, each one, you, me, you, as a gift to himself. So think about that. If someone you love came and said, okay, I just won the lottery, and I can give you whatever gift you want, and I love you so much, and I want to give you the very best gift that I can that would make you super happy, would you say like, oh, I'd like another me because I'm so great? Probably not, right? But God could have made anything in the whole world, and he made you. So I want to do, I'm not a fan of like dramatic whatevers, but I want to just do something real fast, like a little exercise with you guys. You can close your eyes, but you totally don't have to, it's fine. But I want you to just do a little exercise. So when I say to you, God created you as a gift to himself. Now don't think about it too long, but what do you picture in your mind's eye? Do you picture yourself as like a newborn baby with a cute smile? Like that's a gift to God? Or do you picture you like a glamour shot, like on your best day with your hair all done? You're like, yeah, God likes me when I look like that. Or like maybe you just did a really cool thing. You completed a project or you won the game or whatever. And you're like, oh yeah, that's the gift that God meant, right? I mean, we kind of think about that. We got to shine ourselves up and we're like, okay. All right, now try it the other way. Think about the very worst moment in your life. The very worst day you've ever had. Maybe you did something awful. Or maybe something awful happened to you. Maybe you were broken. Maybe it was one of those days you were sobbing in the shower. That day, God made you as a gift to himself. So see, that's the trick, right? And that's what we have to do. So that's why I'm here to help you, remind you of those moments. And then you can go and share with others. That's what life is all about. And it's this mystery, this inexplicable mystery right at the heart of creation. Why did God create anything at all? I mean, the world is messy, right? We're messy. And then why did he create me specifically? I mean, that's the entire goal of our lives, is to try to figure it out, right? And so what we have to understand is that he doesn't need us, but he desires us, and he loves us. And when he created us to desire and love him, right? And so that famous St. Augustine quote, right? Our hearts are restless until we rest in him. So when we're going about our day and we're looking for all kinds of things that are going to fill us up and make us happy, I know I'm not going to really talk about politics, but let me tell you, politicians are looking for things to fill them up and make them happy all day long, right? And you're like, gosh, maybe just pray for a minute. That might help. But it's important that, he knows us and he loves us intimately at every moment of our day and every moment of our lives. That best shiny moment, but also that worst moment. And there's nothing that is outside of his knowledge and his understanding. And he created you, not willing you to have that worst day, but knowing that you would have it, right? And whether it's a worst day because somebody broke your heart or because you broke something, he knew that before he created you, and still he said, I want you as a gift for myself. So when we kind of look around the world, we see a lot of brokenness, and we see a lot of people in need. And a few years back, again, when I was in LA, I had the privilege of being at the opening ceremony for the first ever suicide prevention clinic. And it's in downtown LA, it's right on the corner. It's this great organization, and they have this huge sign out front, like Suicide Prevention Clinic. And what they're trying to do is destigmatize suicide. So just as you would go into a breast cancer clinic or a whatever, if you are having suicidality or suicidal thoughts and you need help, mental help, come here. This is where we help you. And so it was really neat. And I was there, and one of the speakers was the head of the Department of Mental Health for LA County. A guy with all kinds of letters after his name, and he's been to all of the top universities in the country. And I mean, LA County Department of Mental Health, like that's a big deal. And he's the director, and he was there, and he got up and he said, I've worked in the mental health field all over the country for 40 years. I've studied this method and that method and this method and everything. And we expected like, oh, he's gonna have this, super profound thing to say. And he said, I will tell you exactly what people who are considering suicide need. So, okay, we're all getting ready. Meaning and purpose. Like, oh. And he said, I know. You should be shocked because that's not what anyone teaches in psychiatry school or psychology school or counseling school or whatever. They teach you this prescription or this therapy or this whatever. He said, that's not, all of those things are second. Yes, they're helpful. Yes, they're necessary in many instances. But what every single person who is considering suicide is lacking is a sense of meaning and a sense of purpose. And I left that event thinking, well, heck, it's pretty cool to be Catholic because you know what we have? Meaning and purpose. We know who we are and we know what we're made for, right? So if Catholics just lived Catholic and we proclaim that to the world, we would solve all the problems, right? Isn't that cool? In fact, you might have read a study a couple of years ago specifically on suicidality by people and their faith and their practice of their faith. And there was this one group out of all of these groups of people in all different faiths and how they practice or don't practice, whatever, there was one group that had 0% suicide rate. Anyone know what that group was? Catholic women who attend Mass more than once a week. 0. So there's something to be said for that, and meaning and purpose, right? So again, it doesn't mean anyone struggling with suicidality or mental health is not a good Catholic at all. It just means that sometimes the very basic things about who we are and what we're made for are so strong that when really understood and when people are helped through that process to understand and to make that a part of their daily life, that can be incredibly helpful. So today we have a problem, though, the rise of the nuns, not sisters, but the N-O-N-Es, right? We've heard about that? Yeah, rise up, sister. No, the rise of the nuns and the bishops all over the country, right? That would be a really funny movie, like a Star Wars movie, the rise of the nuns. So the N-O-N-Es, right? The people who say, I'm not affiliated with any religious faith, and the bishops are getting all freaked out about it, and they're like, what should we do? Should we bring tambourines back into church? And all this, they don't. Come on, bishops are old, single guys without kids. They don't know. So we have to help them, right? We have to help them. Don't quote me. This is being recorded. Hi, bishops. I love you. No, but it's true, right? So so we have to help them. We have to try to figure it out. But one thing that you'll notice is that we have kind of a dual situation happening. So as belief in God goes down, there's something else that goes down in our culture, and it's the belief in humanity. And we're going to make that connection because I think it's really important that we know exactly why. So when we talk about giftedness, like today we're talking about, we learn so much from John Paul II. If you haven't read John Paul II, you should do that. And you should read his letter to women and his document on women if you haven't read those. It's phenomenal. But you can pick up anything of his and read it. And so he really spent a long time talking about this beautiful theology of giftedness and really making sure that we know that we are dependent creatures, right? Specifically, we are daughters of the Most High, right? We are daughters. And it's only because he is our father that we are daughters, and then we're actually sisters of Jesus. Like, that's pretty crazy, right? To say that. So again, meaning and purpose, right? We got that. That's really cool. But when we lose that sense of sacredness, when we lose the sense of God, when so much of our culture just says God either doesn't exist or, which is almost worse, he's totally irrelevant from the situation. Just irrelevant. Like, I believe in God if you want to, but he has nothing to do with my daily lived experience of life, right? We cease to have that connection of giftedness, and we cease to be daughters. And so what happens? If you are a person of faith and you have a goal, an end goal, in theology we call it a telos, right, an end, you have that end goal for heaven, right, union with Christ, then your whole entire life is ordered in such a way as to get you there. If you don't have that end, you become, I like to use the word unmoored. You know, like a ship, right, tied to a dock, and it can bounce around and it can move and it can withstand the storms because it's tied to the dock. You unmoor the ship, and what happens? It just floats out of nowhere. And I feel like a lot of people in the world today are unmoored. They have no connection to any telos, to any end goal. And so they're creating a reality for themselves, right? Can you imagine how exhausting it is to have to define your own humanity to yourself every day, to have to be redefining who I am in this moment, who I am in that moment, who I am to you. Everything about myself is up for grabs. Everything is fluid. I can be this or I can be that. I have to decide. I mean, it's exhausting for me to just figure out what to put on in the morning and how to get my kids to school on time, right? I mean, to really have to, like, every day define for myself who I am and who I interact with and how I do that and who I want to portray myself to be on social media or whatever, it is exhausting. And so to be a Catholic and to say, you know what, God? You made me, now you deal with it. I'm passing the buck up to you, right? It is so freeing to have that ability to say, I am a daughter of the Most High. That's my identity. I don't have to make it up every single day. I already know who I am, right? So take a big sigh of relief and say, check that off your list. You don't have to do that. But as followers of Jesus, we are also called to change the world. And so we talked about how just understanding your giftedness, like think of Lizzie, right? Understanding her own giftedness, even in the middle of this terrible situation where people look at her and just say, oh my gosh, like God made this, God made her, you know? But she is changing the world through her interactions by allowing people to see the joy that she has in her very being. Right? Her very self, this body that other people think is broken or is disgusting or shouldn't even exist, is actually what brings her joy and brings her closer to Christ. And so I think that's also something that is really important for us to understand as women, that we are made in God's image, not just our souls, but we're made in God's image, our bodies. And sometimes it's tough to be a woman with a body, right? It's tough in this world. And so to recognize that giftedness that we have is also about our bodies. And so it's okay to be like, well, I need to, go on a diet, or I want to train for a marathon or whatever. I mean, hey, do those things. That's great. That's fantastic. But when we get to a point where we find ourselves embarrassed of our body or hating our bodies, we have to go back to that first exercise. I mean, maybe the day that you thought of your worst day was after you just had a baby and your body is like freaking out, or I don't know, right? Like your body's not gonna, a lot of you are young in this room, so you don't know, but you will, some of you will. They're just an FYI, there's so much they don't tell you, so many things. But it's all good, you'll enjoy it. So just to remember that all of our giftedness and all of our beauty, and it's not outward beauty, but that's part of what God gives us. And so if we really did know that every day, and we bring that sensibility out into the world, because that's what we're meant to do, right? So you can stand in front of your mirror in the morning as you're getting ready and say, God loves me, God made me, He's here with me, and that's great. And then you go out into the world and you kind of turn that off. That's not really what we're called to do either. You might not have the ability to straight up evangelize in your job, right? And that's okay. But you can still be a witness. You can still be a witness through your actions and through your words and through the way that you interact. And that's actually one of the beautiful things about Given, is that professional women can come together and say, how do you bring your faith into the workplace? Because that's really hard. Is there a way to be a Catholic woman in business that's different than being a non-Catholic? Yes, there is, right? And it all comes down to understanding and recognizing your own giftedness and other people's. Because as you did that mental exercise of remembering your worst day and that God chose to make a gift of you to Himself on that day, think about that other person in the cubicle over or whatever, right? Or the person on the street or the person in prison or wherever. God chose to make that person a gift to Himself on that worst day too. And so are you treating that person like he or she is a gift that God gave Himself? No, we don't. We don't, because that also is exhausting, but that's what we're called to do. That kind of exhausting is good, right? We forget, though, because we just get busy. We get busy and we go about our daily life and we forget. And so it's always good to have as a reminder. So I want to talk a little bit next in terms of giftedness. I want to do one other quick meditation. Women sometimes have a challenge with understanding humility and words like that. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Receptivity is another good one. We're going to talk about receptivity. Okay, so that meditation from Mass, when we say, Lord, I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof, but only say the word and my soul shall be healed. That's a beautiful meditation. And for a very long time, I spent praying that I would be healed so that I would be worthy. Because we say, I'm not worthy. Well, I want to be worthy. I want you to enter under my roof. So praying that I would be worthy, right? And then, this is not my original idea. I heard someone say, that's not the right prayer. The right prayer is praying that you understand your worth as a child of God. And that's a totally different spin on that. I will never be worthy. You will never be worthy. None of us are ever worthy. Giftedness is something that we receive, so that word receptivity, ooh. But we're never ever worthy of it. And so praying that we understand our worth that's been given to us is a totally different concept. Because that worth doesn't come from anything we would ever do for ourselves. It's completely gratuitous. That means it's completely given to us through none of our own action. We could never ever be worthy. But we're in good company because Jesus, as we know, humbled himself, took on the form of a man, and came to earth so that he could be one of us. He who is God came down to be one of us, and in so doing entered into our life and redeemed every single aspect of our life. So there's nothing that we do on earth that cannot be redeemed, that hasn't already been sanctified, right? And so all of those things. So what are women asked to do? We're told that we are receptive. Yes? Now, if you read John Paul II, you'll read all about his theology of the body and how our bodies are receptive, right? And that is true. But there's more than just our bodies that are receptive. Our nature is receptive in a different way than very often men's nature is, right? Our nature is meant to be receptive. And there's another word that comes with receptivity, and that's the word surrender. And those words together are not super popular in our culture, right? I don't know about you, but I don't like to surrender to anything. And I'm not super good at receiving either. I would much rather give a gift than receive a gift because it kind of makes you embarrassed, like, oh, I really didn't want this, or I really don't like it, but thank you. Right? Some of you might feel that way. Others probably are really good at receiving gifts. And if you are, then, that's awesome, but I'm not that kind of person. But as Blessed John Henry Newman said, God has committed some work to you that he has not committed to any other person in the world. There's work that only you can do in this world, that you have been given. And I think that as women, part of that work is to understand how we see the words receive and surrender as action words. These are words that involve our entire will. They're not things that are done to us. I think women's role in our nature, in the gift that we've been given, is to receive with open arms, to say, I will this, I receive this. And then to surrender to that will, not always knowing what we're getting into, but saying yes and meaning yes. And that's an action word. It's not something cowardly. It's not something that's forced upon us. It's us saying, yes, I am taking an active role in my life and I am doing these things. And I think it's important to understand what that means in your life. So I have a couple little quick stories to tell before I finish up. So I went to USF and I worked at Ignatius Press when I was, so we're here right that way. And I worked at Ignatius Press when I was a student. And one of my colleagues at Ignatius Press decided that she was going to join the Cloistered Carmelite Sisters. That was right, if you know where that is. And so we threw her all these big parties and everything. And then on the day that she was set to go into the Cloistered Convent, she was really excited and it was fine. And so there were a bunch of us lined up in two lines, and she walked down and there's this big door, and she knocked on the door. And the door opened. There were all these sisters lined up inside. And she like turned around and waved, and then she went through, and then the door closed behind her. Thud. And I just remember sitting there, like I broke out in a cold sweat. I was just like, oh my God, I gotta get out of here. Like, I felt claustrophobic. And I was like, oh my God, that is the worst sound I've ever heard in my life. She will never leave this place. And it was just this moment where, like, I was really happy for her, but I knew that was not my vocation. Like, no. Seriously, I was like, I need to get away from this place. So I love that the sisters are there, and if that experience for you is like, oh, that seems cool, then good for you. But discernment is a part of learning how we surrender to things. I didn't have to surrender to that, because that's not my job. I have to work with the legislature in California. I have to surrender to that. Some of you, yeah, you're like, hey, I gotta go with the sisters. Right? That's okay. But that's all about discernment. And it's all about, again, that act of the will of saying, I receive what I've been asked to do, and then I surrender to that. But it's through a discernment process. It doesn't mean you just have to take everything that comes along. It doesn't mean we're meant to be doormats or meant to be like little mice and say, oh, okay, this man asked me to do this thing, or my boss, won't give me a raise or whatever. No, not at all. It means discern and don't have false humility. Recognize the gifts that you have. If you deserve a raise, then you deserve a raise, and you should go and you should talk nicely and kindly and make your case and do all of those things in a professional way. That's not the opposite of receiving and surrendering, right? So I have one other quick story for you. You've probably experienced some things like this in your life where God talks to you, right, and in different ways. So he might talk to you more nicely than he talks to me. But sometimes I feel like I get smacked upside the head, like, stop being so stupid and just listen to me. So there's one situation where, I'll just share this little story. I graduated from the John Paul II Institute in DC on May 13th. They always graduate on May 13th. It's Our Lady of Fatima Day, and so every year it's May 13th. And I had a picture. We used to actually have cameras with film in them way back then. And sometimes when you printed the film, pictures came out that had the date stamped on them. I don't really know why, but I had a picture of my graduation, and it had the little date on the bottom, and it said May 13th, 1999. And it was hanging in the hallway at my parents' house. And this becomes relevant in a second, you'll see. So when several years later, I had been doing all kinds of things with my career. I actually worked for the Archdiocese of San Francisco up here, and then I worked for the Sacramento Life Center up in Sacramento. And then when I got married, and I had my oldest son, Joseph, I was kind of prioritizing being at home. I still wanted to work, so I had a part-time job. It was just not a good time in my life or my career. I was thinking, like, what am I doing? What's happening? Whatever. And then I kind of quit a job, and I just was having trouble finding something that made any sense, and I felt kind of adrift in my life. I'm not great at being a stay-home mom. It's not really my gift either. And my husband was like, you need to find something to do. And so it was during this time, and Joseph was 4. He wasn't quite in kindergarten yet. And it was during this time that my dad got really sick. My parents lived on a ranch up in Auburn, and we were way down in Southern California. And so because I'm the youngest of 6 kids, and because my son wasn't in school and I didn't have a job, all my siblings were like, you get to go take care of Dad. So we were driving up, Joseph and I were driving up like every other weekend to come and help my mom and give her respite so she could, go do other things, and I'd take care of my dad and whatever. And so during this time, and then my dad died of COPD. So this was about 15 years ago. And so then, again, my siblings were like, okay, can you just go and stay with Mom? She's a mess. And so we went up for the funeral, and then Joseph and I were like, okay, we'll stay for like a month or 2 or whatever and just kind of help her out. And it was just this time where things were not going well. I'm like, what am I doing here? And I remember standing in my parents' house, and I'd been there for maybe like a month already, and I'm just like, listen, this is ridiculous. What am I doing? I'm wasting my time here. I have all this education. I came out of grad school, and I thought I was going to change the world. I was going to do all these things, and here I am, like, babysitting my mom, and God, what's going on? I was just so mad. I was like at my wit's end. And I was standing in the hallway of our house, and my eye happened to catch that picture of my graduation. And the date kind of like jumped out at me, right? May 13th. And it was like God just smacked me upside the back of the head. He was like, shut up and listen to me for a minute. My dad died on May 13th. And he was like, you are exactly where you're supposed to be right now. Just shut up and make the best of it and stop whining at me. And I was like, okay. So later, I understood that was a gift that I was not wanting to receive, that gift of being there with my mom during that time and helping her through that grieving process and allowing my son to be a part of that moment too and to see what it is to take care of someone else. And we made it through, and he went to kindergarten and I got another job and things were fine. But it was just at that very particular moment and just such a weird connection, like this little date on this photo and God's voice just saying like, dummy, why are you so stupid sometimes? So I don't know if you've ever had that. If you haven't, maybe God's spoken to you in maybe gentler ways. But for me, sometimes he definitely has to yell. So I really just want to leave you all with this idea that the gifts that women have, and if you read John Paul II, you can learn a little bit more about this or just kind of, think in your own life how this works for you. One of the gifts that women have is that we can understand love at a very deep level and what that means in terms of the other person and that otherness of the other person, right? And a lot of that has to do with the way that we're made. Even if you don't have a child right now, when you do, you'll understand in a really kind of dramatic way what that is. But if you don't, or even if you never do, women are given this gift of really seeing this otherness in a way that sometimes men are not. It doesn't mean we're better than men, it just means we're different. And that's one of the things that we bring into the world, right? We bring in this empathy, this ability that we can have more interpersonal relationships. We can listen to people, we can be empathetic, and we can form communities that are person-centered, that help people thrive, whether that's in our business, whether that's in our family, in our community, maybe it's a community of friends. And that's something that we can do because we're given those gifts to do. And so I would just encourage you to take kind of those words that we've been talking about today that might seem like bad words and figure out how they're good words to you. So of course it's discernment, because everything has to be through discernment. Doesn't just mean if somebody asks you to do something, you have to say yes. It means discern, is this the right thing, right? But then receive it, actively receive it. Say, great, okay, I take this and I own it now. And then surrender maybe some other idea or some other concept you had of yourself to this new understanding of how what you've been given to do will change your life. And sometimes it changes it in amazing ways you would never have expected. Doesn't mean there's not pain or suffering or sadness. It just means that if you do that, God has told us he'll be with us all the way along. And he will love you through that process. So that's all I've got. If I didn't teach anything new, I'm sorry. You can ask for your money back. But thank you so much.